I was able to find at least 24 streets in Lexington that were either named after horses or connected to horse racing, but the actual number is much higher. Getting a true number would require an exhaustive search of street names in Lexington, cross-referenced against the names of racehorses and their owners and jockeys and horse farms. The racing industry has shaped the naming of Lexington in a way that nothing else has. You likely know the big names, Man o' War, Citation, and Aristides Boulevards. They're all named after famous horses, as is Bold Bitter, Affirmed Court, and War Admiral Way. Even some names that sound like they're named after people are actually horses. That includes Sir Barton Way, Dan Patch Drive, and Tom Fool Way. And you may think Real Quiet Lane is just a cute street name until you see Silver Charm and Winning Colors Lane connected to it and realize that those are all horses. Madden Drive is named after John Madden. His farm, Hamburg Place, produced 5 Kentucky Derby winners. Elmendorf Drive is the name of the farm that his horse, Hamburg, was bred at. In Hamburg, the development is now full of roads named after horses like Starshoot and Pink Pigeon. Darley Drive is named after the famous horse Lexington. Darley was his original name, and some famous jockeys like Oliver Lewis and Sue Perkins have streets named after them. If you'd like to hear more on the subject, there's an episode of the podcast Tales from the Kentucky Room, put out by the Lexington Public Library, where librarian Wayne Johnson goes deeper into that subject. If you have a good question, just email us, goodquestion@wkyt.com. I'll see you on WKYT Morning.